A man steps off a private jet at O'Hare International Airport after 12 years abroad. He is worth more money than most people will see in 3 lifetimes. He has offices on 3 continents. His name is on a building in downtown Chicago that took 4 years and $40 million to construct. He has shaken hands with prime ministers. He has been featured in Forbes. He flies home to Chicago not for a vacation, not for a board meeting, but because something has been pulling at him for months. A feeling he cannot name. A restlessness that no amount of success has been able to quiet. He tells himself it is nothing. He tells himself he is just tired. He steps through the revolving doors of his own company headquarters on a gray Tuesday morning in November, and the marble lobby echoes under his shoes, and his staff lines up to applaud him, and he smiles and he nods and he shakes hands. And then his eyes drift to the far end of the lobby, and everything stops. There is a woman on her knees near the east pillar. She is scrubbing the grout lines between the floor tiles with a small brush. Her back is curved. Her shoulders move in that slow, deliberate rhythm that belongs only to people who have spent a lifetime doing work that no one notices. She is wearing a blue uniform and yellow rubber gloves, and her head is tilted slightly to the right the way it always tilts when she is concentrating. And then she reaches up and pushes a loose strand of gray hair behind her ear with the back of her wrist, so she won't dirty it with the glove. And that single gesture, that one small unconscious motion, stops Marcus Webb's heart completely, because he has seen that exact motion 10,000 times before. In a small apartment in Gary, Indiana. At a kitchen sink. At a stove on a Sunday morning. In a woman who used to sing softly while she worked because she said silence made her sad. His chest locks. The applause around him becomes noise. And in a voice so quiet that only the air around him can hear it, Marcus says the only word that matters. Mama. He has not seen his mother in over a decade. He thought she was safe. He thought she was taken care of. He thought the money he sent every single month for 12 years was reaching her, that she was living quietly and comfortably in the apartment on Meridian Street, that she was going to church on Sundays and making biscuits and waiting for the day he would finally slow down enough to come home. He was wrong. He was catastrophically, heartbreakingly wrong. And standing in the lobby of the empire he built, watching the woman who made him possible scrub his floors on her hands and knees, Marcus Webb begins to understand the true cost of the distance he allowed to grow between them. This is the story of how it happened. This is the story of what was stolen. Not just money, but years and presence, and the ordinary irreplaceable moments that no court and no restitution can ever give back. Stay with me, because every detail of this story matters. Before we go any further into the story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from right now. We have viewers joining us from all over the world, and we would genuinely love to know where you are. Drop your city or your country below. It takes 2 seconds and it means a lot. And if you are new here and this story is already pulling you in, click the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We tell stories that stay with you. Now let us get back to Marcus. Because to understand what he found in that lobby, you first have to understand where he came from. Marcus Darnell Webb was born in 1983 in Gary, Indiana. If you know Gary, you already understand something about the weight of that sentence. Gary was once one of the most productive steel cities in America. By the time Marcus was born, most of that was already gone. The mills had slowed. The jobs had moved. The population had been shrinking for 2 decades, and the city wore that loss the way a person wears grief. In the posture, in the quietness, in the way people moved through streets that used to hold more life than they did now. Growing up in Gary in the 1980s meant growing up with an intimate understanding of scarcity. It meant knowing which lights to leave off at the end of the month. It meant understanding, without anyone having to say it, that there was no room for waste, for carelessness, for taking anything for granted. Marcus's mother, Dorothy Webb, raised him alone from the time he was 4 years old. His father left when Marcus was still small enough to be carried in one arm, and Dorothy never once spoke of him with bitterness. Not because she wasn't hurt, but because she made a decision early on that bitterness was a luxury she could not afford. She had a child to raise and a life to build, and exactly the amount of energy it took to do both if she was careful with it. She could not spend any of that energy on anger. She just moved forward. That was the only direction she allowed herself to know. If you have ever known a woman like Dorothy Webb, and I suspect many of you have, then you already understand that there is a specific kind of strength that lives in people who were never given the option of falling apart. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It just keeps moving. Early morning, late night, sore hands, empty refrigerator, tired smile. It just keeps moving. Dorothy worked 2 jobs for most of Marcus's childhood. During the day she worked at a hospital laundry facility on the east side of Gary, loading and unloading industrial washing machines, folding hundreds of sheets and gowns and pillowcases in a room that smelled permanently of hot bleach and fabric softener. The smell came home with her even after she showered, faint and chemical and specific, and Marcus associated that smell with safety for years afterward without fully understanding why. In the evenings she waitressed at a diner on 5th Avenue called Patty's, where the vinyl booths were cracked and the coffee was strong and the tips were modest but consistent. She smiled at strangers for hours. She carried heavy plates on a frame that looked too small to manage it. She came home after the dinner rush with her feet hurting and her back stiff, and she still checked Marcus's homework before she went to bed. She was a meticulous woman. Their apartment was always clean. Not decorated, they didn't have the money for decoration, but clean in the way that signals self-respect, in the way that says I may not have much but I take care of what I have. She cooked from scratch because she said it was both cheaper and better, and the smells that came out of that small kitchen on weekday evenings and Sunday mornings were the smells that Marcus Webb would spend the rest of his adult life trying to find again in restaurants across 4 continents and never quite locating. On Sunday mornings she made biscuits. The recipe came from her own mother, who had gotten it from hers, and it involved a specific combination of buttermilk and cold butter, and a technique for folding the dough that Dorothy had never written down because she said her hands already knew it. Marcus has eaten at tables in London and Paris and Tokyo that cost more per seat than his mother's monthly rent ever was. He has never eaten a biscuit that came close. Marcus was a quiet child. Serious in the way that children become serious when they understand early that the world requires something of them. He was not withdrawn. He had friends, he laughed, he played, but there was an attentiveness to him, a watchfulness, that his teachers noticed from the beginning. He read everything he could get his hands on. The school library, the public library 4 blocks away, the paperbacks his teachers occasionally passed along when they thought a student might connect with something. He had a particular mind for numbers and systems and the way things fit together, the logic of structures, the efficiency of processes. His middle school math teacher, a patient man named Mr. Patterson who had been teaching in Gary for 20 years and had seen a lot of students come through his classroom, wrote in Marcus's 7th grade report card that his mathematical intuition was, in Mr. Patterson's exact words, almost unsettling in its precision. He meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. At 14, Marcus won a regional science competition with a project on logistics optimization, a study of how a local distribution network could reduce fuel costs and delivery time by restructuring its routing system. He had built the model himself using graph theory he had taught himself from a library book. Most of the adults in the room at the competition did not fully understand the project. The judges gave him first place, and one of them, an engineer from a firm in Indianapolis, pulled Dorothy aside afterward and told her that her son had a genuinely unusual mind and that she should do everything in her power to make sure it got the education it deserved. Dorothy drove home from that competition and cried in the parking lot of their apartment building before going inside, because she was proud in a way that had nowhere else to go, and because she was already calculating what it would take to give him what that engineer had described, and the numbers were difficult. The answer came 2 years later in the form of a partial scholarship to a magnet high school in Indianapolis that specialized in mathematics and applied sciences. It was a good school. It was also 200 miles from Gary and from Dorothy. Marcus was 16 years old. He remembers the night they talked about it at the small kitchen table in the apartment on Meridian Street. Dorothy had made chicken and rice for dinner, her version with a bay leaf and black pepper and a little more garlic than most people used because she said food should have conviction. She sat across from him and she listened to him explain the scholarship and the school and what it would mean, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said without any hesitation, "Go. You go. Don't you dare let this pass." He asked her if she would be all right. She looked at him with an expression he has spent his whole adult life trying to properly describe, and she said, "Baby, I have been all right since before you were born. You don't worry about me. You go and you be everything I know you are." He went. Indianapolis for high school, then a full scholarship to the University of Illinois at Chicago, a degree in computer science and business administration, graduating in the top 3% of his class. Then 2 years of grinding through entry-level analyst positions before a chance encounter at a startup incubator in the West Loop connected him with 2 other young men who had an idea, a coder named Derek from Evanston and a designer named Phil from Detroit. The idea was a supply chain software platform that would allow mid-sized logistics companies to automate vendor communications, track inefficiencies in real time, and reduce operational waste through predictive modeling. It was technical, unglamorous, and exactly the kind of problem Marcus's particular brain had been assembled to solve. They called the company Webb and Associates, which Phil thought sounded established and Marcus chose because he wanted something with his name on it that his mother could find easily if she ever searched for him online. They worked out of a shared office space above a dry cleaner on Wabash Avenue for the first 2 years. The smell of cleaning chemicals drifted up through the floorboards and Marcus found it oddly comforting. Familiar in a way he didn't examine too closely. They ate ramen and frozen burritos and whatever someone's girlfriend brought in. They worked 18-hour days with the specific desperate energy of people who have bet everything on one idea and cannot afford to be wrong. They argued constantly and productively about every decision and they built something real. By 2011, a British investment firm had taken notice. By 2013, they had offices in Chicago, London, and Singapore and a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. By 2016, Webb and Associates was processing logistics data for clients across 4 continents and Marcus Webb was 32 years old and worth more money than his mother had ever been able to imagine, and he called her every week to tell her so. Through the early years of the company's growth, Dorothy was the person Marcus called first for every milestone, every setback, every late night when the doubt got loud enough to drown out everything else. He called her when they closed their first major contract. He called her when they lost a client they had spent 8 months courting. He called her when they opened the London office and he stood in the empty space for the first time and felt something he couldn't articulate. Something between terror and joy. She answered every time. She said things like, "You are not lost. You are built for this. Don't let them make you feel small in those rooms." She said them in the plain, certain way she said everything, as if the truth of them was simply not in question. And for a long time he called. He called regularly, he visited when he could, he sent money every month without fail. Enough for her rent, her groceries, her medications, the small dignities that made the difference between comfort and struggle. He told himself he was taking care of her. He told himself that the money was the proof of that. He told himself a lot of things that turned out to be substitutes for the one thing she actually needed from him, which was his presence. But that realization would come later. First, it would get much worse. Somewhere around 2014 and into 2015, the calls slowed. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just the gradual, almost imperceptible thinning that happens when a person's life fills up past the point of management and the things that feel stable begin to receive less attention because the things that feel urgent demand all of it. Weeks passed between calls. Then a month. Then 6 weeks. He sent a text. He got one back. He told himself she was fine because the money was going and she hadn't called him in distress, and in the particular blindness of someone who is working constantly and sleeping too little, he allowed that logic to stand unchallenged. What he did not know, what he had no way of knowing, because no one told him, was that in the spring of 2015, Dorothy Webb's bank account had stopped receiving his transfers. The money was still leaving his account every month. It was going somewhere. It just wasn't going to her. Let me tell you about Raymond Holt. Raymond was 44 years old when Marcus hired him in late 2013 as a personal accounts manager. His job was specific and administrative. Handle the domestic financial transfers. Manage the monthly support to Dorothy's account. Oversee a small charitable fund Marcus had set up in his mother's name. Pay the property taxes on a plot of land in Indiana that Marcus had purchased with the quiet intention of building Dorothy a house on one day when things slowed down enough. Raymond came with solid references. He was organized, attentive, fluent in the language of financial administration, and he was good at making the people around him feel that things were in capable hands. For the first year and a half he did exactly what he was paid to do. The transfers went out on time. The charitable fund was managed correctly. The property taxes were paid. Everything appeared to be functioning exactly as it should. The records would later show that Raymond began diverting the transfers in March 2015. He started slowly and carefully, the way a person starts something they intend to stop before it becomes serious. A few $100s redirected each month to an account he controlled, the remainder still reaching Dorothy so she would not immediately notice a change. He told himself, as people in his position always tell themselves, that it was temporary, that he was in a difficult patch, that he would replace it before anyone noticed. He had gambling debts that had accumulated over 2 years. He had a lifestyle that had expanded beyond his salary. He had convinced himself that the amounts were small enough to be manageable, that the arrangement was temporary, that it would correct itself. It did not correct itself. By July 2015, the transfers had stopped reaching Dorothy entirely. What Raymond had constructed was a shadow account, a secondary account with a number nearly identical to Dorothy's, differing by only 2 digits in the middle, routed through the same bank. When Marcus's automated payment system processed the monthly transfer, it went to the shadow account. Raymond controlled the shadow account. Marcus's statements showed the transfers going out as scheduled, to what appeared to be the correct destination. There was nothing in the automated reports that flagged the discrepancy because the account number Marcus had on file had been quietly changed by Raymond in the payment system before the diversion began. It was not sophisticated fraud in the technical sense. Raymond was not a criminal genius. He was simply a man who had been given unsupervised access to someone else's trust and had chosen, one small step at a time, to use it for himself. And because Marcus was running a global company and was not in the habit of calling his accounts manager to manually verify individual transfers, and because Dorothy had no way of reaching Marcus directly, the arrangement continued. Month after month, year after year, for 7 years. During those 7 years, Dorothy tried. She tried harder than Marcus would know until much later, and the knowledge of it would sit inside him like something he could not fully digest. She called the phone number she had for him, which was a number from 2013 that had been replaced twice since then. Marcus had never updated her with the new one because in the chaos of company growth and international offices it was the kind of simple personal task that fell through the cracks of a life that had become too large and too fast. She wrote a letter to the company address she found through an online search, a general inquiry address that went to a reception inbox that Raymond was responsible for screening. She called Raymond. She reached him twice. The first time, in late 2015, she asked whether everything was all right with Marcus, whether something had happened, whether there was a reason she hadn't heard from him. Raymond told her that Marcus was very well, that he was in the middle of a significant expansion into the Asian market, that he had mentioned Dorothy recently and sent his love. Raymond told her the transfer issues were related to new international banking regulations and would be resolved within a few months. The second time she called Raymond, in early 2016, she told him about a phone call she had received from a man claiming to be a colleague of Marcus's who had asked questions about her bank account details. Something had felt wrong about the call and she had ended it. Raymond told her she had done the right thing, that it sounded like a phishing attempt, and that he would make sure Marcus was informed. He did not inform Marcus. He had made that call himself. By 2017, Dorothy had used the small savings she had accumulated over decades of careful, disciplined living. She borrowed against them. She sold the things she could sell. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself Marcus was busy and the money issue would be resolved and she just needed to manage until it was. She was 60 years old and she had managed worse. She kept the apartment on Meridian Street as long as she could. But by the spring of 2018, the rent had gone 3 months unpaid and she could not cover it. She left the apartment she had lived in for 22 years with 2 suitcases and a box of kitchen things, and a woman from her church helped her find a room in a shared house on the other side of Gary. It was a small room. It was clean. She kept it exactly as she had kept every space she had ever lived in, spotless, ordered, dignified. She found cleaning work through neighbors and word of mouth. She cleaned other people's houses and apartments. She was 60 years old with arthritis developing in her left hand, and she showed up every single day and she did not complain. Not to anyone. Not once. By 2020, a placement agency called Midwest Commercial Cleaning Partners had connected her with contracted cleaning work in commercial buildings and office spaces. The pay was better than private residential work. The hours were earlier. She started most mornings between 6 and 7, which suited her because she had never slept late in her life. The agency assigned her to a rotation of buildings across the north side of Chicago and the western suburbs, and in August of 2021 they added a new assignment to her rotation, a corporate headquarters building on South Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago. She was assigned to the lobby and common areas on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She noted the address in the small notebook she used to track her assignments. She did not note the name of the company because the agency listed buildings by address, not tenant name. She had no reason to look it up. She arrived the first Tuesday morning, checked in with the security guard, a quiet, friendly man named Dennis who took his coffee with 2 sugars and who held the supply closet door open for her when her cart was full, and she began to learn the building the way she learned every building, by its details, by what required attention and where, by the specific rhythms of its floors and surfaces. She noticed quickly that the marble floor in the lobby had a grout line near the east pillar that collected dirt faster than the surrounding lines, probably because of the foot traffic pattern near the main entrance. She added it to her mental map of the building's needs. She cleaned it every visit. She did not know that her son had selected that marble personally from a catalog while sitting in a hotel room in London in 2018. She had been cleaning his lobby floor for 14 months before he walked through the door. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question before we continue. 14 months. Think about what 14 months feels like from the inside. Think about Dorothy Webb arriving at that building in the dark of a Chicago morning, 2 or 3 times a week, for over a year. Signing in at the desk, collecting her supplies, kneeling on the floor of the lobby with her arthritic hand and her small brush and her absolute, unshakable belief that her son was out there somewhere living the life she had worked to give him access to. She had no bitterness. Not toward Marcus. She was angry at herself sometimes, in the quiet of the early mornings, for not finding a way to reach him, for not trying harder, for not finding a way through the wall that had grown up between them. But she was not angry at him. She could not be angry at him. She had raised him. She knew who he was, and she would rather believe that something had gone wrong than believe that he had simply chosen to forget her. How many of you would have held on the way she did? How many of you, after 7 years of silence and financial collapse and losing your home, would still be refusing to believe the worst of the person you loved? Think about that. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with the words, "I'm still here." Let us see who is truly following this story, because what is coming next is the part that will stay with you long after this video ends. Don't scroll past this. Type it in the comments right now and keep watching, because the reunion scene, what Dorothy said to Marcus when she finally recognized him, and what Marcus discovered about the full scope of what Raymond had done, all of it is coming. Stay with me. Marcus did not approach her immediately. He physically could not move. His director, a sharp and competent woman named Patricia who had been with the company for 6 years, touched his arm and said his name twice before he registered it. He turned slightly, said he needed a moment, and walked to the east corridor and stood with his back against the wall and his hands pressed flat against the cold surface, and he looked out the corridor window at the rain and he breathed. His hands were shaking. He was 40 years old. He had negotiated 9-figure contracts across conference tables in 4 countries. He had stood in front of investors who wanted him to fail and made them believe instead. He had held himself together through 2 years of a startup that nearly collapsed 3 times, and a business partnership that ended badly, and a personal life that had sacrificed itself almost entirely to the company. In all of that, his hands had not shaken. But standing 30 feet from his mother without being able to cross the distance between them, standing 30 feet from her and not knowing yet why she was here or how long she had been here or what it meant, his hands would not stop shaking. He pulled himself together methodically, the way he handled every crisis, by getting information first and letting the emotion follow once he understood what he was dealing with. He took out his phone and called his head of human resources, a precise and discreet woman named Sandra, and he asked her to pull the contractor file for the cleaning staff currently assigned to the lobby. He kept his voice even. Sandra asked no questions. She had worked with Marcus long enough to understand that when he used that particular tone, information was the only appropriate response. She called back in 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Marcus counted. She read him the entry from the contractor manifest. Dorothy May Webb. Date of birth August 14, 1959. Assigned to lobby and common areas, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, since August 2021. Contract managed through Midwest Commercial Cleaning Partners. Marcus thanked her and ended the call and stood in the corridor for another 3 minutes without moving. Then he went to the 3rd floor to find Raymond Holt. Raymond's office was empty. His assistant said he was in a vendor review meeting on the 4th floor. Marcus took the stairs. He did not want to wait for the elevator. He stood outside the 4th floor conference room and he waited, and after 11 minutes Raymond came out with 2 other staff members, already talking about something on his tablet, and when he looked up and saw Marcus standing in the corridor his face did something. It was a very small thing. A fraction of a second of something that moved through his expression like a current before the professional composure came back over it. A person who was not watching closely would have missed it entirely. Marcus had built his entire career on watching closely. He registered it completely. He said, "Raymond, we need to talk right now." Raymond said, "Of course, give me 1 moment," and reached for his phone. Marcus put his hand over Raymond's phone with a calm that surprised even himself and said, "No, not 1 moment. Right now. Walk with me." By noon that day, Marcus had an external forensic accountant on site. A woman named Dr. Carol Reeves who had done work for the company's auditing firm and who arrived within 90 minutes of his call. By 4 in the afternoon she had pulled 7 years of transfer records. By 6 she had reconstructed the shadow account scheme in full. By 8 that evening Marcus was sitting in the company's main conference room with Dr. Reeves, 2 attorneys from the company's legal firm, and Raymond Holt. The documents were laid out on the table. The total of the diverted transfers over 84 months, from March 2015 through the previous October, was $387,000. Raymond looked at the documents for a long moment. Then he looked at Marcus. Then he looked back at the documents. He said he had been in serious debt. He said it had started with a single transfer that he had fully intended to replace before the next one was due. He said it had grown beyond what he had expected, and that he had not known how to stop it without exposing what he had already done. He said he had always planned to find a way to pay it back. He said all of this in a voice with no particular expression in it, the voice of a man who had been carrying something too long and had run out of the energy required to defend it. Marcus listened to all of it. He did not respond to any of it. He did not trust what he would say. There was something else. Something that had to happen the following morning before anything else, before the legal process and the documentation and all of the machinery of consequence that would now move forward. He had the HR coordinator pull Dorothy's schedule for the next day. She was assigned to the lobby the following morning, a Thursday. Marcus left the building at 9 that evening. He went to his hotel. He did not sleep. At 5:45 in the morning he got in the car and drove himself to the building, and he let himself in through the executive entrance, and he dismissed the overnight security staff from the lobby, and he turned the lights down to their nighttime setting, and he sat in a chair in the shadow of the east corridor and he waited. He was wearing the same suit from the day before. He had not changed. It had not occurred to him to change. At 6:47 in the morning, Dorothy Webb came through the service entrance on the building's south side. She had a paper cup of coffee in one hand. She paused at the entrance to set it on top of her cart, the same way she always did. Marcus would later learn from Dennis, the security guard, that she did this every single morning. And then she pushed the cart through the lobby doors and began moving toward the east side of the floor. She did not see Marcus in the chair in the corridor. The lobby lights were low and he was sitting still, and she was focused on her work, the way she always focused on her work, fully and without distraction. She maneuvered the cart to its usual position near the east pillar. She set down her coffee cup on the cart's upper shelf. She took out her supplies, the brush, the cleaning solution, a folded cloth. She adjusted the knee pad she wore on her left knee because the marble was hard and her left knee had been troubling her for 2 years. And she knelt down near the east pillar and she began to clean the grout line that she had cleaned 100 times before. Marcus stood up from the chair. He crossed the lobby. His footsteps were quiet on the marble but not silent. Dorothy's head came up slightly, but she did not turn. She assumed it was Dennis or one of the early staff arrivals. Marcus stopped about 4 feet from her. He crouched down to her level, right there on the lobby floor, in his rumpled $1,200 suit, and he said, as quietly as he had ever said anything in his entire life, "Mama." She looked up. The lobby was still dim and she was not wearing her glasses, and she squinted slightly in that particular way she had always had, that small, determined frown that meant she was trying to see something clearly. She looked at the shape of the man crouching in front of her. She looked at the way he held his shoulders. She looked at the set of his jaw and the angle of his hands resting on his knees. She looked at his eyes. The light was low and the years had changed his face in the way that 12 years will always change a face, deepening it, settling it, putting in the lines that living puts in. But the eyes were exactly the same. They were her eyes. The shape of them, the particular quality of the attention in them, they were the eyes she had been looking at since the first moment she had ever held him. She had passed those eyes down to him the way her own mother had passed them to her, like something held in trust across generations. She looked at his eyes and she went very still. And then she reached out with one yellow-gloved hand and touched the side of his face. Very slowly. The way you touch something that you are afraid might not be real. And she said, in a voice barely above a breath, "Oh, just that single sound." "Oh," he said, "take those gloves off, Mama." She pulled them off. Her bare hand, rough and small and familiar, held the side of his face, and Dorothy Webb began to cry without making any sound at all. Not silently out of restraint. Silently because the feeling was simply too large for sound, the way deep water is quiet while shallow water is loud. Marcus put both arms around her right there on the floor of his lobby, on the marble he had chosen from a catalog in a hotel room in London, and he held his mother and she held him, and neither of them spoke for what felt to both of them like a very long time and was probably about 2 minutes. When she finally pulled back and looked at him, her face was wet and she was searching his face with the intensity of someone accounting for lost time, cataloging the changes, making up for years of not being able to look at him. And then she said, in a voice that was quiet and steady and that cost her something to say, "I thought you forgot me." For words. And they broke something in Marcus Webb that he will tell you honestly has not fully healed, and that he does not expect to fully heal, and that he thinks probably should not fully heal because that particular break is the thing that keeps him honest about what matters. He said, "I never forgot you. Not for one day. I never stopped sending money, Mama. Someone took it. Someone redirected it. I didn't know. You have to understand, I did not know." And Dorothy looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was not accusation and was not quite forgiveness either, but was something quieter than both of those things. A kind of recognition, as if something she had suspected and refused to let herself fully believe had now been confirmed, and she was rearranging herself around the truth of it. She said very quietly, "It was Raymond, wasn't it?" It wasn't a question. She had suspected. Not from the beginning, but over time, in the way that a person who has lived a careful and attentive life eventually notices the shape of things even when they cannot see them directly. In 2016, she had received a phone call from a man identifying himself as a financial administrator at Marcus's company, asking her to confirm certain details of her banking information under the pretext of updating records for a new international transfer system. She had answered 2 or 3 questions before something in the call felt wrong. The questions were slightly too specific, the man's manner slightly too careful in a way that felt rehearsed rather than professional. She had ended the call and called Raymond to report it. Raymond had told her she had done exactly the right thing and that it sounded like an attempted fraud, that these kinds of phishing attempts targeted people connected to high-net-worth individuals, that he would ensure Marcus was informed and security protocols reviewed. He had sounded reassuring and competent. He had sounded, Dorothy would later say, exactly the way a person sounds when they know exactly what you are talking about because they were the one who did it. She had not been able to reach Marcus directly to tell him herself. The number she had was dead. The letter she sent to the company address received no response. And after a while she had allowed herself to accept Raymond's explanation because the alternative, that the man Marcus trusted to take care of her was the very person dismantling that care, was a thought she did not have the resources to fully reckon with while simultaneously trying to keep herself housed and fed. She put it in a part of her mind that she left mostly closed. She moved forward. It was the only direction she knew. Marcus listened to all of this in the lobby that morning. He sat on the floor beside his mother's cleaning cart and she sat beside him and she told him what she remembered, quietly and in order, the way she had always told him things, without drama, without self-pity, just the facts laid out so they could be understood and dealt with. When she finished he sat with it for a moment and then he said, I am going to fix this. And she put her hand on his arm the way she had put her hand on his arm when he was a child coming home from school with a problem that felt larger than he knew how to handle. And she said, I know you are. I always knew you would when you found out. I just had to wait until you found out. Think about those words for a moment. I just had to wait until you found out. Not I am angry. Not you let me down. Not look at what I had to endure. Just the steady, absolute confidence of a woman who knew her child and never stopped knowing him. Even when everything around her was suggesting she should. Even when the evidence was pointing in only one direction. Even when she was on her knees in a building that bore his name, cleaning floors she did not know were his. She waited, because she knew. And here's the question I want you to sit with as we move into the final part of the story. Is there someone in your life who is waiting for you the way Dorothy waited for Marcus? Not in the dramatic sense. Not someone who has lost their home or been betrayed by someone you trusted. But in the quieter sense. Someone who is carrying on, doing what they have always done, believing in you in that steady and unannounced way, waiting for you to find out that they need you? Think about whether you know who that person is. Think about whether you have been moving so fast that you haven't checked. In the weeks that followed that morning in the lobby, the legal process moved efficiently. Raymond Holt was suspended immediately and escorted from the building that same Thursday. Marcus's legal team filed the documentation with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. The forensic accounting report provided a comprehensive reconstruction of the fraud, 84 months of diverted transfers, the shadow account, the intercepted correspondence. Raymond was charged with wire fraud and theft by deception. The case moved through the courts over the following 18 months. Raymond did not significantly contest the core findings. He was convicted. He was ordered to make full financial restitution and sentenced to a period of incarceration. Marcus attended none of the court proceedings. He did not need to be there. He had given his statement, the documentation was thorough, and there was nothing in that courtroom that he needed more than he needed to be somewhere else. Specifically, he needed to be at the apartment in Evanston on Sunday mornings. Marcus moved Dorothy out of the shared rooming house in Gary within a week of that Thursday morning. He had already, by the second day, arranged a 2-year lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in Evanston, on a quiet street with oak trees that would be bare in November, but that he knew from the neighborhood research he had done online would be full and green and beautiful by the time spring came. He asked Dorothy what she wanted in the apartment. She said she didn't have strong preferences about most things as long as there was a proper kitchen. He understood what she meant by proper. He hired a furnishing service to outfit the main rooms, and then, the day before she moved in, he went to the apartment himself with 4 paper bags from a grocery store and stocked the kitchen the way he remembered it being stocked when he was a child. The brand of coffee she had always kept in a small yellow tin that lived on the left side of the second shelf. The specific dish soap she had used throughout his childhood, the yellow kind in the oval bottle, because she said every other brand left a residue she could feel on the plates. Bay leaves and black pepper and garlic powder and a particular kind of hot sauce she put on eggs. He put a small television on the kitchen counter near the window because she had always maintained, as a household principle, that the living room television was for watching things properly and the kitchen television was for company while you cooked. These are the things you know about a person when you pay attention. These are the things you lose access to when you stop. She moved in on a Saturday afternoon in December. The following morning was Sunday. Marcus arrived at 8 in the morning with a bag of groceries, and she was already in the kitchen in her housecoat with coffee made, the small yellow tin on the second shelf exactly where he had put it, and she was making biscuits. The same recipe. Her hands knew it. She had made those biscuits in a kitchen in Gary on Meridian Street for 22 years, and in a rented room in a shared house and in other people's kitchens when she cleaned them, just for herself, just because it was Sunday. And now she was making them in a kitchen that was hers, in an apartment on a quiet street in Evanston with oak trees outside the window, and her son was sitting at the kitchen table with his hands around a mug of coffee watching her. Marcus Webb, 40 years old, worth more money than he could meaningfully spend, founder of a company on 4 continents, sat at that kitchen table that Sunday morning and watched his mother make biscuits and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He did not say much. Neither did she, not at first. There was a companionable quiet in that kitchen. The kind that only exists between people who have known each other long enough that silence doesn't need to be filled. She hummed while she worked. The same habit she had always had. A low, unspecific tune that wasn't quite a song. Just sound. Just a way of filling the air with something warm. He had not heard that sound in 12 years, and it moved through him in a way he wasn't prepared for. He drank his coffee. She slid the biscuits into the oven and set a timer, and then she sat across from him at the table and looked at him the way she had looked at him his whole life. Clearly, directly, with that particular quality of attention that made you feel both seen and held at the same time. He said, "I'm sorry, Mama." Not for the money or for Raymond or for any of the specific failures he could enumerate and explain. Just, "I'm sorry." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, and she said, "You found me. That's what matters. You found me." He has not missed a Sunday since. Whatever is on his calendar on a Sunday morning, and there is almost always something on his calendar on a Sunday morning, he moves it. He has moved meetings with investors. He has moved calls with international partners who do not understand American Sunday rhythms. He has moved things that felt, before he found his mother on the floor of his lobby, like they could not possibly be moved. They can always be moved. He has not missed a Sunday in 2 years. Every Sunday morning, Marcus Webb drives from whatever hotel or apartment he happens to be staying in that week to a 2-bedroom apartment in Evanston with oak trees outside the windows and a kitchen with a yellow tin of coffee on the second shelf of the cabinet. And he sits at the kitchen table and he drinks coffee and he watches his mother make biscuits and he stays until the afternoon. He stays until he genuinely needs to leave, not until he has done his time and checked the box. He stays because that kitchen on a Sunday morning is the most important place he has found in 40 years of looking. There is one more detail. When Marcus had the lobby floor at Webb and Associates replaced, the marble was taken up and a warmer, lighter stone was laid in its place, something that held less shadow, something that felt different underfoot. He kept one tile. One square of the original marble from near the east pillar. From the section closest to the grout line his mother had cleaned 100 times. He had it cut cleanly and framed simply, and he put it on the windowsill behind his desk in his office. Not displayed. Not on the wall with the awards and the Forbes cover and the photographs of the company's milestones. On the windowsill behind his desk, where he can see it when he is sitting in his chair, where it sits in the peripheral edge of his vision on every ordinary working day. If you asked him to explain it, he would have difficulty finding the right words for it, as people always do when they are trying to explain the things that keep them honest. But I think most of you listening to this already understand what that tile is for. Some things we keep not as trophies but as anchors. Not as reminders of failure, precisely. More as reminders of what failure taught us about what actually matters, so that we do not have to learn it again. Dorothy Webb is 64 years old. She does not work anymore. She goes to church on Sunday mornings and comes home and makes biscuits, and her son comes to breakfast. She has a proper kitchen and oak trees outside her window and a small television on the counter for company while she cooks. She has her son back. Not the version of him that existed in the years of distance and silence and the careful lie of delegated care. She has the actual version of him, the one who shows up and sits at the kitchen table and stays. That is what she has. That is, she has said on the occasions when Marcus has asked her what she needs. Everything she has ever needed from him. Marcus Webb still runs his company. Webb and Associates still occupies that building on South Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago. The lobby floor is new now, lighter stone, warmer underfoot. There is no cleaning cart parked near the east pillar on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Dennis, the security guard, still works the front desk. Marcus stops to talk to him on the mornings when he comes in early, which is most mornings. He knows Dennis takes his coffee with 2 sugars. He learned that from his mother. He has learned, in the 2 years since he found her, to pay attention to those details again. To hold on to them. To understand that the ordinary specific details of the people in your life, the 2 sugars, the yellow tin, the way a person pushes hair behind their ear with the back of their wrist, are not small things. They are the entire thing. They are how you know someone. They are how you stay knowing them. They are the thing that distance erodes first, quietly and without announcement, until one day you realize you have been sending money to a shadow and calling that love. Before the private jet and the Forbes feature and the empire on 4 continents, there was a woman in a small apartment in Gary, Indiana, who worked 2 jobs and cooked from scratch and cleaned her home until it shone and sat across a kitchen table from a quiet, serious boy and said, "Don't you dare let this pass. Go. You go." She made him possible. Not in the abstract, motivational poster way that we use those words when we want to honor someone without the inconvenience of specificity. In the literal, material, daily, exhausting, sacrificial sense. She made him possible. She just did it so quietly and so consistently, and with so little demand for recognition that it was, for a long time, easy to take for granted. And that, more than the fraud and the diverted money and the shadow accounts and the legal proceedings, is the real cost of this story. Not $387,000. Years. 14 months of marble floors. 22 years on Meridian Street. Slowly losing everything. Never losing faith. The cost is years and presents and Sunday mornings and the ordinary irreplaceable texture of being known by someone who loves you. You have heard this story now. And I want to ask you, before you scroll to the next thing, to sit with it for just a little longer. Not for Marcus's sake and not for mine. For yours. Is there someone in your life who is quietly present in the way that Dorothy Webb was quietly present? Someone whose consistency you have been relying on without fully seeing? Someone who is still at the kitchen table, still making the biscuits, still holding the faith, while you are running toward the next thing. You do not have to have failed them the way the systems around Marcus failed Dorothy. You just have to ask yourself honestly whether you are showing up the way they deserve. Whether the version of care you are offering is the real version, the present, attentive, sitting at the table version, or whether it is the delegated version, the automated version, the version that feels like care from the inside but looks, from where they are standing, like distance. If the story moved you, if it made you think of someone, if it pulled something up that you needed to feel, if it changed even slightly how you are thinking about the people who matter most to you, please leave a comment below. Tell me who the story made you think of. Tell me what you are going to do about it. You do not have to be specific. You do not have to explain everything. Just tell me that you heard this and that it landed somewhere real. And if you have not subscribed yet, do that right now before you leave this page. Because we are here every week with stories like this one. Stories that are not about the extraordinary but about the unbearable, tender weight of the ordinary things we almost lose before we understand their value. Stories that are less about what people built and more about what they almost destroyed by building it. Stories that ask the questions that matter. Hit subscribe, leave a comment, and go call whoever the story just made you think of. Right now, before the next urgent thing arrives. Go.